Good evening. This is Professor Rush once again with part 4 of our continuing saga of the history of the Old Testament. So far we have determined that Abraham, right on up to Joseph, are poetic figures constructed to create a mythical charter, a document delivering special privileges and landholdings by their demon deity Yahweh, who is connected to the Aten sun disk of ancient Egypt. By at least 560 BCE, the Jews installed monotheism in a further attempt to separate themselves from the other Canaanite tribes. Keep in mind that the Hebrew were also Canaanites. Rather than simply pick one of the deities floating around the Middle East for the past several thousand years, their need to separate themselves from the other Canaanite tribes led them to a deity in ancient Egypt connected to a special pharaoh. I'll get to him in a moment. Although the sun was worshipped all over the Middle East from the beginning of recorded history, the Aten sun disk was purely Egyptian. Moreover, monotheism was not a unique idea, as the ancient Egyptians had a term, neteru, which could mean the god or the gods. So now let's get to our major player in the Old Testament, first encountered in Exodus, that is Moses. The name Moses has two meanings. First, Moses was originally an Egyptian word meaning son or son of. For example, we have Ramses or Tutmosis, the first meaning son of Ra, and the second son of Thoth. However, when the Jews were developing their storyline, they had to alter the meaning to drawn from the water. In other words, they borrowed the Sargon the Great story as told in the previous presentation. Recall that Sargon's lowly mother placed him in a basket of rushes sealed with bitumen and set him in the river. Aku the irrigator pulled him from the water, and then the goddess made him a ruler. The Jews altered this and had Pharaoh's sister draw him from the river. Now, Pharaoh's sister would have given him an Egyptian name, not a Hebrew name. The Egyptians saw the Hebrew, and everyone else for that matter, as scum and beneath them. By the way, this is where the Jews acquired their attitude of superiority toward the other tribes and to the rest of the world to this day. Recall from the previous presentation that Uya, the template for Joseph in the Bible, and Tuya have a daughter by the name of Tai. Tai marries Amenhotep III. They have a son, Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten. So let's get to Moses. Moses never existed, contrary to the biblical historians, the History Channel, and Cecil B. DeMille. But like Joseph, he is based on a real person. In this case, a pharaoh mentioned in part 3 of this series, that is, Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten. Now, I spend about 100 pages on Judaism and Moses and failed God, and can only give a brief outline here. For the details and references, I direct you to that work. In any case, Akhenaten is known as the heretic pharaoh, although his actions were probably prompted by his father, Amenhotep III, the likely template for Solomon, as mentioned in part 3 of this series. So here's what happened. Akhenaten was pharaoh from 1353 to 1336 BCE, and for the first few years of his reign, he lived in Thebes in Upper Egypt. As suggested in the Mushroom in Christian Art, the priests closely connected to his father, that is Amenhotep III, probably had a great deal of influence on his behavior, taking him on a trip to the gods, either with Anamina muscaria, henbane, cannabis, or some combination, and convincing him to abandon the head deity at Thebes and install the Aten sun disk. Now, this may seem far-fetched, but these are powerful substances and have been used for thousands of years for this very same purpose. That is, to convince people of the existence of a deity or deities. This was a common procedure among the early Christian cults, and you can see the Mushroom in Christian Art for a discussion of this. In any case, Akhenaten closed all the temples in Egypt and demanded that the only god to be worshipped was the Aten. He did this in a very repressive manner, which parallels the repressive nature of Yahweh in the Old Testament. The Amun-Ra priesthood was very, very powerful, and in fear of his life, he moved his residence about 200 miles north and set up shop in a new city known today as El Amarna. He had many followers, his own army, a bevy of priests to attend to the Aten, and mix up his mind-altering potions for communing with the god. In fact, it's highly likely that communion with the deity was available to most of his followers. Akhenaten paid little attention to the affairs of state. He didn't wage war or look after Egypt in any systematic manner. But he did look after his followers. Sound familiar? Now remember, Pharaoh was a god on earth, and he could bequeath his followers anything he wanted, and he had the power to do so. Now, around 1336 BCE, Akhenaten disappears. Egyptologists are uncertain what happened to Akhenaten. There are some comments available in the Hebrew literature that he either left and went to Nubia and ruled for a while or went somewhere else. But in my opinion, he left for fear of his life, went to the Sinai, and attempted to build an alliance with the Shasu, that is, the Hebrew tribes in that area, remaining there for around 18 or more years. During this time, many of his loyal followers remained at Amarna, although many defected and returned to Thebes and the Amun-Ra worship. Does that sound familiar? In my opinion, he returned to Egypt during the time of Horemheb, whose dates are 1323 to 1295 BCE, or perhaps Ramses I, 1295 through 1294 BCE. Both were very weak pharaohs, in an attempt to get his job back. This is the part in Exodus where he confronts Pharaoh and presents his brass or golden staff or scepter as a sign of his right to rule. Again, he doesn't get too far with this, as most of the priests felt he had visited a plague on Egypt. That is monotheism and the worship of the Aten exclusively, and he leaves again. Remember, Akhenaten was a god, and he visited a plague, monotheism, on Egypt. Does this sound familiar? And to this day, monotheism is a plague because it divides people. You're either part of the system or you are the enemy. The Exodus is certainly a composite story. At any rate, when Akhenaten leaves Thebes for the last time, he goes to Amarna, rounds up some of his loyal followers, goes to the Delta area and rounds up perhaps 60 people or maybe 60 families, not 600,000 as told in the biblical myth, and heads back to the Sinai. Now, as Pharaoh, he could bequeath his followers anything he wanted, like land, for example, Palestine. This is where all the bloodshed comes in, as this group of special people attempts to take over this area of the Middle East. But there appears to be other activities this band of merry men and women are engaged in, and that is raiding back into Egypt for supplies and so on. Ramses I, or perhaps Seti I, a very powerful pharaoh, got tired of this, went to the Sinai, and killed Akhenaten. This is the part in Exodus where Moses does not get to see the promised land, as the story goes, because he took water without Yahweh's permission. Remember, a god killed Moses, or Akhenaten, and that god would have been Pharaoh, perhaps Ramses I, or maybe Seti I, a god on earth. In any case, part of this story is speculation, but there can be no doubt that the person of Moses is based on Akhenaten. Many Egyptologists understand this, although they apparently don't have the integrity to make this clear to the world. Even our father of the phallus, Sigmund Freud, came very close to saying who Moses was in his book, Moses and Monotheism. It is a curious thing that the Pharaoh of the Exodus is not mentioned by name. Surely this is not the same Pharaoh encountered by Abraham or Joseph, also not named in Genesis. The Hebrew poets certainly go out of their way to inform about the names of all the kings, fictitious or otherwise, as they were terrorizing the various Canaanite tribes. So why not name the Pharaoh? Well, the Egyptians wrote down their history, although they elaborated heroic deeds and so on, and to name the Pharaoh would allow future scholars to check out their history and dispute their storyline as fact. Cecil B. DeMille and some scholars state that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was Ramses II, but this is unlikely as he was much too powerful to put up with someone like Moses. Moreover, Ramses did not die in the Red Sea. We have his mummy. Moses and the Exodus story are considered the cornerstone of the Jewish tradition, but as I have shown, this cornerstone is myth, pure and simple. So now you get to choose your storyline. In other words, if you believe in gods and demons, then you're likely to buy into the Bible story. If, however, you understand that there was a real pharaoh by the name of Akhenaten, a god on earth, who installed a very repressive form of monotheism, just as the case with Moses, then perhaps you'll go with that story. In any case, any reasonable person has to see this document, that is, the Old Testament, for what it is, a mythical charter designed to obtain special privileges in land holdings and to enslave people. To see this story, that is, the cornerstone of the Jewish faith, Moses and the Exodus, as historical fact, and to report it as such in history books and on the History Channel, is nothing less, in my opinion, than academic fraud. In the next presentation, I will consider the identity of Jesus, who he was and who he was not. Now, as I mentioned in a previous presentation, the Pope is coming out with a new book, and in that he is stating that the Jews did not kill Jesus. Well, of course they didn't. He's a non-person. It's very difficult to kill a non-person. In any event, it was the Catholic Church who actually murdered Jesus, as we will see in the next presentation.